If you ever cried at a commercial on a Tuesday and felt completely fine by Friday, you already know that your mood is not a personality trait. It's a chemical event. The problem is that nobody explains which chemicals, or why they shift, or what it actually means when they do. You get told to sleep more, stress less, try journaling, and none of that addresses what's actually happening inside your body. So, let's address it. We're breaking down every hormone that directly controls how you feel, not just the obvious ones, but the ones that quietly run your emotional life without ever getting credit for it. What each one does when it's working correctly, what happens when it isn't, and why your mood on any given day is far less random than it seems. Estrogen is the first place to look when your mood starts sliding, because estrogen doesn't just affect your body, it runs a significant part of your brain. Estrogen regulates the production and sensitivity of serotonin, the chemical most people associate with happiness and stability. When estrogen is high, serotonin receptors are more responsive. When estrogen drops, which it does in the week before your period and dramatically during perimenopause and menopause, serotonin activity drops with it. This is why low mood before your period isn't a coincidence or a character flaw. It's estrogen taking serotonin down with it on the way out. Estrogen also influences dopamine, the motivation chemical, and norepinephrine, which affects focus and alertness. So when estrogen falls, you're not just sadder, you're less motivated, less focused, and more prone to irritability, all at the same time. Here's the part that most people find clarifying. If your mood reliably worsens in the 2 weeks before your period and reliably improves shortly after it starts, estrogen is almost certainly the primary driver. That pattern is hormonal, not psychological. Recognizing it doesn't fix it, but it changes the relationship you have with it. But estrogen doesn't work on mood alone. The hormone that sits right beside it in the emotional equation is the one nobody talks about. Progesterone's relationship with mood is one of the most underappreciated stories in female health. After ovulation, progesterone rises, and when it's at healthy levels, it has a calming, anti-anxiety effect, because progesterone converts into a neurosteroid called allopregnanolone, which acts directly on GABA receptors in your brain. GABA is your brain's main inhibitory neurotransmitter. It's the chemical that quiets things down, slows the mental noise, makes it possible to feel calm. So adequate progesterone through this conversion pathway is effectively a natural anti-anxiolytic, a natural anti-anxiety compound your body makes itself. When progesterone drops, which it does sharply in the days before your period, that calming effect disappears rapidly. And for women who are already running on low progesterone, which is common in the 30s and 40s, this isn't just premenstrual irritability, it's a neurological withdrawal from a compound the brain had been relying on. This is the hormonal mechanism behind what gets clinically called PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, extreme mood shifts, rage, despair, anxiety that feels disproportionate to anything happening in real life. The life circumstances didn't change, the neurosteroid floor dropped out. What's particularly frustrating is how often low progesterone gets misdiagnosed as generalized anxiety or depression, because the symptom overlap is nearly perfect. The difference is timing. If it tracks your cycle, progesterone deserves to be part of the conversation. Now, both estrogen and progesterone operate inside a system that has a hierarchy, and at the top of that hierarchy is a hormone that doesn't care about your cycle at all. Cortisol is your body's stress response hormone, and it has more influence over your mood than most people realize, because it doesn't just respond to stress, it actively shapes your emotional baseline. Cortisol follows a daily rhythm. It peaks in the morning to get you moving, then gradually declines through the day. In a well-regulated nervous system, by evening it's low enough that you can wind down, sleep, and let everything reset overnight. When that rhythm breaks, when cortisol stays elevated through the evening or spikes at the wrong times, or flatlines when it should be high, mood dysregulation follows. Chronic high stress is directly linked to anxiety, irritability, and emotional reactivity, not because you're overreacting, because your stress system is running on a setting it was never designed to sustain. There's also a direct relationship between cortisol and serotonin. High cortisol suppresses serotonin production, so chronic stress doesn't just make you feel stressed, it chemically reduces your access to the most neurotransmitter responsible for emotional stability. And here's the compounding problem. Cortisol suppresses progesterone, so the women who are most stressed are often the ones who end up with the lowest progesterone, which removes the GABA calming effect exactly when they need it most. The system collapses inward on itself. Cortisol peaks at 8 a.m. in a healthy body. If you wake up already anxious, already braced for the day before anything has happened, your cortisol rhythm has likely shifted. That's not a mindset problem, it's a timing problem in the endocrine system. But cortisol doesn't operate without backup. There's another hormone running alongside it, one that most people have never heard of, that determines whether you can emotionally recover from stress at all. DHEA, dehydroepiandrosterone, is produced by the adrenal glands right alongside cortisol, and in many ways it functions as cortisol's counterweight. Where cortisol mobilizes and activates, DHEA supports recovery and resilience. Where cortisol tears tissue down in the short term, DHEA supports repair. And in terms of mood specifically, DHEA has been shown to have direct antidepressant effects, not through a drug mechanism, but because it converts into estrogen and testosterone, both of which support emotional stability and motivation. DHEA peaks in your mid-20s and declines from there. By the time a woman reaches perimenopause, DHEA levels may be half of what they were at their peak, and because DHEA is upstream of both estrogen and testosterone, its decline contributes to the mood changes of midlife in ways that don't always get attributed to it correctly. The mood signature of low DHEA is specific, not acute sadness, not sharp anxiety, but a flatness, a dulling of emotional range. Things that used to feel exciting don't register the same way. Resilience to stress feels lower. Recovery from difficult events takes longer. Chronic stress accelerates DHEA depletion because the adrenal glands are busy making cortisol and have fewer resources left for DHEA production. So again, the most stressed women tend to have the lowest DHEA, which reduces their capacity to buffer the very stress that's depleting them. DHEA is rarely tested in routine blood panels. Most women have no baseline and no idea where their levels are, which is part of why the flatness it causes gets written off as personality or aging, or just how things are now. That's one story. Here's a completely different one that most people think has nothing to do with hormones.
Thyroid hormones, T3 and T4, regulate the speed of everything happening in your body, and that includes your brain. T3, the active form, directly influences the production and signaling of serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. All three are neurotransmitters central to mood regulation. When thyroid function is low, hypothyroidism, these neurotransmitter systems slow down with it. The mood presentation of hypothyroidism is almost identical to clinical depression. Low mood, emotional flatness, cognitive slowing, fatigue, loss of interests, difficulty concentrating, withdrawal from social connection. The two are so similar that hypothyroidism is consistently found in populations diagnosed with treatment-resistant depression, meaning people who didn't respond to antidepressants because the underlying problem wasn't a serotonin deficit, it was an underactive thyroid. Hyperthyroidism in overactive thyroid does the opposite. Anxiety, emotional volatility, irritability, difficulty calming down, racing thoughts, not because something is wrong psychologically, but because the thyroid is running the entire system too fast. What makes this particularly significant is that hypothyroidism is 8 times more common in women than in men, and autoimmune thyroid conditions, which can cause the thyroid to fluctuate between underactive and overactive, are also predominantly female. Mood swings driven by thyroid fluctuation can be severe and are frequently misread as bipolar adjacent or as anxiety disorder. Standard thyroid panels only check TSH, the brain's signal to the thyroid. A normal TSH doesn't even guarantee T3 and T4 are at functional levels. It doesn't even guarantee the conversion between them is working correctly. Many women with significant thyroid-driven mood symptoms are told their results are normal. Not the same as fine. Normal on a limited panel, which is different. Now let's talk about the hormone that sits underneath every motivation, every pleasure, every reward, and what happens when the signal gets jammed. Dopamine is not technically a hormone in the classical sense, but it functions as one in the context of mood and motivation, and is regulated by several hormones, estrogen chief among them. Dopamine governs anticipation, motivation, drive, and the experience of reward. It's what makes you want things, not just the pleasure of getting them, the wanting itself, the forward pull toward goals, toward connection, toward anything that feels worth moving toward. When dopamine signaling is healthy, you feel motivated. You have things you're looking forward to. Effort feels connected to outcome. When dopamine is low or dysregulated, none of those feelings are reliably available. You know intellectually that something should feel good, but the feeling doesn't arrive. Estrogen enhances dopamine activity. When estrogen drops, premenstrually, perimenopausal, after childbirth, dopamine signaling drops with it. This is part of why postpartum mood changes can be so severe. Estrogen falls off a cliff after delivery, and dopamine takes it with it. Chronic stress through cortisol also suppresses dopamine over time, as does chronic sleep deprivation, as does the constant low-level dopamine stimulation of screens and notifications, which doesn't increase dopamine capacity but trains the brain to require more stimulation to feel anything at all. The mood experience of dopamine dysregulation is not sadness. It's closer to numbness. Anhedonia, the clinical term, is the inability to feel pleasure from things that previously provided it. It's one of the most disorienting mood states because it doesn't feel like a feeling, it feels like an absence. And it's one of the things most likely to be dismissed by doctors, by people around you, sometimes by yourself, as attitude, laziness, ingratitude, when physiologically it's a neurotransmitter problem with identifiable hormonal drivers. One more, and this one is the simplest and in some ways the most underestimated. Melatonin's role in mood is almost entirely indirect and almost entirely overlooked. Melatonin is a timing signal. It tells your body when it's night, which initiates sleep, which is when the entire hormonal system does its maintenance work. Growth hormone is released, cortisol resets, the brain consolidates emotional memory from the day, neurotransmitter systems replenish. When melatonin is suppressed by screens, by artificial light, by irregular sleep schedules, this maintenance window shrinks. The system doesn't get its reset, and the cumulative effect of interrupted hormone repair night after night is mood instability that has no obvious single cause, because the cause is structural. It's in the architecture of the day, not in any single event. There's also a direct relationship between disrupted circadian rhythm and depression. Seasonal affective disorder, the mood drop that occurs in low-light winter months, is driven primarily by shifts in melatonin timing and the downstream effects on serotonin. Light therapy works for SAD not because light is pleasant, but because it recalibrates melatonin timing, which restores the circadian foundation that mood regulation depends on. Melatonin production begins declining in the mid-40s. This contributes to why sleep becomes harder during perimenopause and why the mood changes of that transition are not just about estrogen and progesterone. The entire circadian scaffolding begins to shift.